Nuclear Option offers a variety of available weapons across multiple archetypes, not all of which are implemented at the time of writing. The following are a selection of weapons available as of patch 0.29.0, along with their attributes and best use cases. Before discussing weapons in the game, it's important to define some vocabulary for newcomers that may not be familiar. If you know these terms, or want to skip ahead, this video is bookmarked to make finding information about an individual weapon or topic much easier. All weapons in Nuclear Option are considered smart, meaning that these weapons have computers and sensors, known as a guidance system, that allow them to follow targets after they have been fired. In this video, weapons are divided into 4 categories: air-to-air, air-to-ground, ground-to-ground, and ground-to-air. These archetypes affect how and where a given weapon is used, and which of the 3 common guidance methods are available. Optically guided weapons use a camera, laser, or light sensor to track targets. This tracking method provides the greatest accuracy when used in high interference or high target density environments. This system is most commonly found on air-to-ground weapons like bombs, rockets, and cruise missiles. Optical guidance cannot be jammed or confused with countermeasures, but is only effective against stationary or slow-moving targets. Thermal guidance, also called infrared or IR tracking, uses the heat generated by vehicle exhaust or radiators. These missiles are cheap, simple, and can be fired in large numbers, though they have more limited range compared to radar-guided missiles. Thermal guidance can be defeated using flares, but are immune to radar jamming. Thermal guidance is also affected by weather and natural interference, so it becomes less effective in severe storms and can be confused by heat from natural sources like the sun. Radar-guided missiles use radio signals to follow a potential target. These missiles are immune to thermal interference, so flares don't work against them. They can see through the most extreme weather interference, so the only way to stop a radar-guided missile is to intercept it or block the radio signals that it uses for guidance. This can be done by jamming it, notching it, diving for terrain, or using an interceptor weapon. Jamming is the process of creating lots of radio noise to distract or confuse an incoming missile. Notching is an evasive turn intended to cause a missile to overshoot. Terrain occlusion is the use of ground-close maneuvering to hide from radar tracking. Air-to-air missiles. Air-to-air missiles are designed to be fired from one aircraft to another, though many of these missiles can also be fired from ground-to-air platforms. AAM-S1. The smallest and cheapest air-to-air missile in the game, the AAM-S1 is slow but exceptionally agile. While its warhead isn't powerful, the S1's thermal tracking systems are very accurate, allowing this missile to be fired quickly and precisely at the drop of a hat. With a 5-kilometer range, it's a favorite of short-range air defense systems, where the S1 excels at incoming missile and light air intercept. While precise, the AAM-S1 can't account for terrain and is vulnerable to IR flares. On its own, this missile isn't hard to deal with, but is often used to put pressure on attacking aircraft over time by depleting their flare reserves. Low cost, compact size, and high flexibility mean that the AAM-S1 is easier to transport, allowing ground vehicles to carry large numbers. MMR-S3. Designed primarily for use against other aircraft, the S3 is larger and faster than the S1, making it harder to carry in large numbers. With a maximum range of about 15 kilometers, depending on speed and altitude, the MMR-S3 is a popular choice for air-to-air mission profiles. It can be carried by, and used effectively against, supersonic aircraft of all kinds, while remaining agile enough to kill incoming missiles. This weapon is hard to place on mobile ground units, but is a popular choice for cruisers and destroyers, who have the space for larger launchers and magazines. AAM-29 Scythe. The current smallest radar-guided missile in the game, the Scythe offers tremendous range and stopping power, though its mass and size preclude or significantly limit deployment on lighter aircraft. With a 120-kilometer range, the Scythe can attack pretty much anything it can see, though firing at longer range means that a target has more time to notch, dive for cover, intercept, or otherwise evade missile guidance. The Scythe is maneuverable enough to be used at medium range alongside the MMR S3, and makes for an excellent 1-2 punch against targets with multiple countermeasure sets. The Scythe is able to leverage data link to fire on targets beyond visual range or off angle from the attacker. It will switch to its own radar system for terminal guidance, at which point a target lock becomes much harder to break. This switchover process is required for the Scythe to approach for a kill, and takes a few seconds to lock in. When fired at close range, the Scythe's internal radar takes a few seconds to acquire and track a target, which makes it increasingly less effective the closer to a target that it's fired. Ground-to-air missiles. A ground-to-air missile is generally designed to be fired only from ground vehicles. This means they care less about weight and placement than air-to-air missiles. As a result, these missiles are usually more powerful and can be carried in larger magazines than aircraft typically support. Ram-45. Designed around a vertical launch system and omnidirectional targeting, the Ram-45 is both compact and modular, allowing large magazines to be fitted on several platforms. Most commonly seen in the Bolt Strike tank and Shard corvette, the Ram can target incoming ordnance and aircraft with high precision up to a 15-kilometer range. Despite its small size, the Ram-45 carries a powerful warhead that is effective against all aircraft. StratoLance R9. Designed primarily to deny high altitudes to the enemy, the R9 platform is reliant on a separate long-range radar system to see its targets. Extreme range focus means that the Lance performs poorly at lower altitudes and is vulnerable to terrain occlusion. Even when firing over the ocean, pilots who can hug the deck below 15 meters are essentially invisible to it, and can close to engage the launcher directly, but are vulnerable to other close-range defenses in the process. Air-to-ground missiles. Missiles optimized for ground attack find limited use in other fields of battle, so there are few applications outside of aircraft for these weapons. These missiles often sacrifice agility for speed and armor penetration, so they are typically useless against other aircraft, though a few exceptions exist. All air-to-ground systems are vulnerable to thermal and radar-based defenses. AGR-18 Lynchpin. While it's used like a rocket, the Lynchpin is technically a missile with a limited guidance system and 5-kilometer range. Lynchpins are carried in small pod launchers and designed to be fired in groups, making them ideal for saturation attack against air defenses or closely grouped vehicles. With a 2-kilogram warhead, these rockets are not individually significant, but in swarms they can overwhelm and destroy ground vehicles. Low mass and compact design make the Lynchpin a common sight on light aircraft and helicopters, but this flexibility comes at the cost of destructive potential. The Lynchpin is not effective against heavy armor, fortifications, or large structures like factories, but it can devastate soft targets, light armor, and small ships. The Lynchpin is weak against SPAAG or Anvil ballistic defense systems, which can destroy rocket swarms with enough advanced warning. AGM-48. The smallest and lightest of the full-sized air-to-ground missiles, the AGM-48 has an 8-kilometer range and 10-kilogram warhead yield. This allows it to destroy most ground vehicles with a single shot and from beyond their engagement range. It features a randomized maneuvering guidance system that can help it evade some ballistic defenses, but is weak against the IRM-S1, SP-AAG, and laser defenses. The AGM-48 is one of the few air-to-ground missiles able to attack aircraft, typically helicopters, under the right conditions. Any air defense vehicle can destroy this missile in flight, and often will if fired from maximum range. This means the AGM is best deployed in groups against multiple targets from between 3 and 5 kilometers. With its limited maneuvering ability, firing the AGM-48 from too close to the target will often result in a missed shot. AGM-68. Everything you loved about the AGM-48, but in a bigger package sporting a 130-kilogram warhead. The AGM-68 is less maneuverable than its smaller cousin, and so its minimum effective range hovers around 5 kilometers depending on speed and vector. It features a similar randomized maneuvering system as the AGM-48, but is generally less effective than its smaller cousin. The AGM-68's flexible optical targeting system means it is still effective against any ground vehicle, though it's best used against tanks, buildings, and fortifications. The AGM-68 shares the same vulnerability to intercept as the AGM-48, a vulnerability which is emphasized by its additional range and weight, so avoid using it around SP-AAG, IRM-S1 launchers, and laser defenses. The AGM-68 remains relatively inexpensive compared to other ground-focused missiles, but its larger size and mass reduce deployment options on smaller aircraft. Though bombers are capable of bulk transport and saturation attack using this missile. ARAD-116. Anti-radiation missiles are technically radar-guided, but instead of generating radar signatures, they listen for and seek them out. This attribute is unique among weapon systems in that it makes the ARAD somewhat autonomous. It's one of the only missile systems that can be fired without a target lock and find one on its own from a range of 120 kilometers if needed. The ARAD's targeting system is passive, meaning that it listens for emissions rather than generating its own. This means that the ARAD can only follow targets that are emitting an active radar signature and will not work against ground vehicles, structures, or aircraft that do not have one. Active radar signatures are reflected on the map by an orange pulsing line connecting your aircraft to the radar that has detected you. While slightly less powerful than an AGM-68, the ARAD can still kill heavily armored vehicles with a single strike, though ships and fortifications can require multiple hits. Care should be used when fired without an initial target, since the ARAD does not distinguish between friend and foe in autonomous mode and will seek any radar signature that wanders into its field of view. While technically capable of seeking aircraft, the ARAD's guidance system is intended for air-to-ground use and is not accurate enough to reliably track aircraft, though it can find large bombers and E-warfare planes provided they don't turn off their radar systems and dive for terrain. ALM-C450. This subsonic cruise missile can engage ground targets up to a 250-kilometer range using GPS coordinates alone, thanks to its complex terrain-skimming navigation system, which helps the missile to evade long-range radar and high-altitude air defense. The C-450 carries a payload similar to, but slightly smaller than, a GPO-500, but remains effective against the same kinds of targets. All vehicles, most buildings, ships, and smaller fortifications are vulnerable to cruise missile strikes, though heavy fortifications may require several direct hits. ASHM-300. Building on the essential concepts behind a cruise missile, the anti-ship homing missile sports a powerful launch assist system that allows it to be fired from a stationary launcher. This capability means it can be fired with no advanced warning, but requires a lighter and more compact frame. As a result, the anti-ship homing missile has less destructive potential compared to an air-launched cruise missile, making it less effective at destroying hardened fortifications. It remains a powerful tool against soft targets, all vehicles, and most small facilities. ALND-4. The Air-Launched Nuclear Deterrent is a long-range subsonic cruise missile with upgraded engines and fuel range. While its guidance system is virtually identical to the ALM-C450, its range is vastly increased to 1,500 kilometers. The air-launched nuclear deterrent is heavier and more complex than a conventional cruise missile, so despite these upgrades, it flies at lower subsonic speeds around 1,000 kilometers per hour. Ground skimming guidance allows this missile to evade radar up to a point, but once detected, it can be destroyed by any air defense system and jet-powered interceptors. The air-launched nuclear deterrent is best deployed after air defenses have been neutralized or as part of a swarm of ordnance to help mask its approach. If this weapon is detected, air defense units will prioritize it over other threats. Gravity bombs. For those times when the simplest solution is actually the best, gravity bombs rely on the altitude and speed of their host aircraft to reach a target. Since these weapons have no propulsion, they emit no traceable heat signatures and can bypass any defense reliant on thermal guidance. Gravity bombs offer much higher damage than an equally sized missile, but are harder to deploy and are weak against all radar-based defenses. 76mm Guided Shell. This long-range artillery shell leverages advanced internal electronics to provide limited guidance in flight. Based on the Excalibur Smart Shell, years of advancement have enabled these weapons to be mass-produced at much lower cost, making their presence on the battlefield far more common. Once fired, the guided shell can alter its trajectory to track slow-moving ground or air targets. The guided shell is just large enough to be reliably tracked by radar systems, so it can be intercepted in flight with the right equipment. Laser defense systems are the best countermeasure, but the Anvil and SPAAG can provide some protection with enough warning. Since the shell is compatible with auto-loading cannons, it can overwhelm defenses with continuous fire, assuming the attacker remains unharassed by defending units. PAB-80LR. The smallest and lightest of the gravity bombs, this optically guided weapon is equipped with glider wings that provide much greater range when deployed from altitude. Gliding allows light aircraft to deploy the 80LR from farther away and with less need for setup and positioning during a bombing run. The extra range provided by glide capability comes at the cost of speed, making the 80LR more vulnerable to SPAAG and point defense systems when detected. The 80LR is small enough that radar-based SAM launchers struggle to detect it, and missile warning systems often fail to register this weapon as a threat. With no IR signature and minimal radar returns, the PAB-80 is the closest thing to stealth that a lightweight bomb can get. It's maneuverable enough to be used against slow-moving aircraft, which often get no warning that this weapon is approaching. PAB-250. This small but highly flexible optically guided bomb is designed for use against heavy armor and small fortifications. Considered the smallest true gravity bomb, the 250 drops on a traditional trajectory. Optimized for use on smaller aircraft, it's the most flexible gravity bomb on offer and is supported by most fixed-wing platforms. While the payload is impressive for its size, the PAB-250 works best when targeting individual threats, and does not deal large area damage. GPO-500. This more powerful surface detonating bomb provides for an area effect explosion that can destroy multiple targets within its blast radius, though damage falls off precipitously with distance from the epicenter. Ideal for use against surface structures, convoys, and fortifications, the GPO-500 can devastate small and medium-sized facilities, though it lacks the penetrating power to destroy bunkers and other similarly hardened targets. High mass and a thick casing make the GPO-500 resistant to laser and ballistic defenses, which it can plow straight through if deployed from close in. Radar-based defenses can destroy this weapon if it's dropped from high altitudes. GPO-2P Auger. A true bunker buster, the Auger requires heavy air power to deploy. Sporting a massive 800 kilogram explosive yield, the Auger relies on its mass to act as a pile driver, shoving the warhead deep into the ground before its delayed detonator triggers. This action concentrates damage to a single target, but limits the total area of effect. The Auger can still inflict significant damage around the target, but the area effects aren't much better than a GPO-500. Demolition Bomb. Also known as a thermobaric, vacuum, or fuel-air bomb, these weapons work by dispersing a highly volatile and explosive fuel mixture above the ground and then igniting the resulting vapor cloud. The demolition bomb is ideal for destroying light vehicles or large, unfortified buildings, but its effect on armored or fortified targets are limited. With a warhead yield equivalent to 11 tons of TNT, the demolition bomb is easy to target during descent. Only the largest bombers can support this weapon, and it must be deployed from a moderate altitude to avoid damaging a host aircraft. Care must be taken to suppress hostile air defenses, because the demolition bomb's large size and slow approach make it very easy to target. GPO-N. The final word on destruction. The GPO-N is a variable yield nuclear gravity bomb that can be used as a tactical or strategic weapon with a 1.5 kiloton or 250 kiloton setting. The GPO is light enough to be deployed on medium fighters, but works best when deployed at higher speeds. In order to allow use at lower altitudes, the GPO-N features a scalable time delay fuse. In its 1.5 kiloton tactical setting, the GPO-N will detonate 8 seconds after impact with the ground if dropped below 150 meters or 500 feet. In its strategic 250 kiloton setting, the time delay scales up to 16 seconds if dropped below 500 meters or 1,650 feet. In its 1.5 kiloton setting, the GPO-N can devastate forward operating bases and small airfields, all ships, and most fortifications. Damage is localized, allowing this weapon to be used around allies with less risk of friendly fire. Like all gravity bombs, this weapon is vulnerable to radar-guided ballistic defenses. SPAAG and Anvil platforms will prioritize this weapon if they detect it. Nuclear weapons are complex, and so are more vulnerable to incoming damage than conventional bombs. In its 250 kiloton setting, the GPO-N can wipe out a population center, large airfields, and sprawling bases. This makes it the perfect finishing blow, but a poor choice to use anywhere near Allied units. The shockwave generated by strategic detonation is lethal to all aircraft in or near the exclusion zone. This makes it an unwieldy beast and a two-edged sword that can easily kill wielder and hostile in a single stroke. These weapons are the selection available as of patch 0.29.0 and may not reflect the current offerings in-game. Individual weapon performance may differ from figures provided in this video, as future patches make adjustments. Feel free to add any additional information, corrections, or insights I may have missed in the comments below. That's all I have for today. If you made it this far, you probably liked the video. Be sure to show it with a click in the right place, or a comment if you feel so inclined. Catch you all later.